Hi, good evening. Yes, in this tutorial we'll be discussing RAM, and when we're talking about RAM, we're actually going to be talking about two separate components, the memory address register, or MAR, and RAM itself. RAM is a place where values are remembered based on an address. Just like each house has a unique address on the street, and each house has a unique set of contents and people, and we'll call that a value. The MAR, by enabling the memory in control line, which is this guy right here, he has the ability to take a value in off the bus, and then we can use that value to look up a value within our RAM. So let's go ahead and reset our CPU. I think it was running from the last time. So get everything set here. So as we can see right now, the address bus has 0. The memory address, of course, has 0. And so you notice that the address value only has 4 bits. So what that's going to do is that's going to take the first 4 bits from the bus and kind of ignore the last 4 bits. Okay, so let's get this guy going. So like in the first example, we're going to enable the clock, and then we're going to let the clock go. All right, and then so we see the program counter counting up because it's receiving the clock signal. Then when we enable the clock out, we get that to the bus. And since the program counter is only outputting 4 bits, the bus is showing 4 bits. So now let's we have an out, so let's do an in. All right. So you can see that the MAR is taking the value on the clock pulse. So the minute the clock pulses, then you take in a value. Okay. So now what's really happening is we're seeing these values of the memory address register change, but we're not really seeing anything in the RAM value, and that's, of course, we haven't programmed anything in. So let's go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to go ahead and halt the clock. Now the next thing I want to point out in the memory address register is the address select button. So there's two possibilities of where we can get the value from. That's either a manual address, which is specified here with these 4 check boxes, or from the bus, which is indicated here. So if we go ahead and click the go button, we see that we go red, and the red is kind of indicating that we're kind of in programming mode and not run mode. So then I have the ability to set the address, and you notice the address value corresponds, so I'm doing that manually. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and program in some values into RAM. So we're going to specify an address as 0, and so address 0 is, of course, all 0, so that means no check. So we already have 0 here. And then we're going to program in a value of 28. And so hopefully you're already familiar with a binary number, so I'm not going to explain what we're doing here, but this is basically 28 in binary here. So we have memory address 0, and under the RAM we have a manual value input. So when we hit store, then we see the value that we made with the checkboxes go into RAM. We're seeing a little bit of delay here. I'm recording a video, and it's, I guess, making the browser run a little slow, so there's a little delay, but you shouldn't have those difficulties. Okay, now we're going to program a different, so basically we programmed memory address 0, and so now we're going to program memory address 1. So to do that, we're going to click here, and we have an address of 1, but you see that we don't have a value in RAM. Well, that's expected because even though we have these checked, actually memory address 1 in RAM doesn't have any values. It's all zeros. We haven't programmed it yet. So the fact that that went away, that's what's to be expected. Okay, the next number we're going to input is 14. And so that's what 14 looks in binary. And we have memory address 1, and we're going to press store. So now we can go and toggle the memory address register here, and then we'll be able to see basically the two values we stored. That was 28 and 14. So just for future reference, this is bit 0 and this is bit 7, and so that works with both, the LEDs and also the checkboxes. So in the user guide, we'll be referring to like bit 0 and bit 7, and we're basically always going from the right to the left when we're talking about numbers, and we start with 0. So what we're seeing now is that we can retrieve values in sequence from RAM. So now that we have some values set in RAM, I'm going to go ahead and switch this back to green, which means we're going to take the counter, we're going to take the address in from the bus. So right now we have a 0. And so when I clicked memory in, you notice that it did not immediately pull the bus value in, and that's because components in are basically what's called latched. We'll get more into that later. That only happens when there's a clock pulse. So I need to re-enable the clock. And so what we're going to see is when the program counter goes to 0 and 1, we're actually going to see values over here in the RAM. And that's because the clock is driving the program counter. The program counter is outputting its value to the bus. The memory address register is reading the bus value. And that's, of course, driving the RAM to show the value based on that address. So now you're seeing how these things kind of play together. And we're seeing more and more of the CPU kind of come to life. So let's uncheck the halt button. Then our counter goes. So right now we see 0 because we don't have any values in RAM in those higher address locations. So let's see. Get a roll over. A few more clock pulses. Patience, patience. Okay, get ready for it. There's 15 and then 0. First value. Second value. We stored two values, then of course we're going back to 0. So that sets us up for the next exercise. We have two values in memory, and the next thing we're going to look at is the ALU, the arithmetic logic unit. And so we'll be basically pulling those values out of RAM into some registers and then see basically some simple addition. All right, thanks. See you then.